In Russia, the trial against U.S. journalist Evan Gershkovich has begun behind closed doors. The Wall Street Journal reporter is accused of spying for the U.S. He could face up to 20 years in prison if he's found guilty. He and his employer have denied the charges.
After more than a year under arrest, Russia is now putting Evan Gershkovich on trial. The 32-year-old journalist was detained in March 2023 while reporting in the city of Yekaterinburg, according to his employer, the Wall Street Journal. Russian prosecutors allege Gershkovich was collecting secret information from a tank factory for the CIA. Gershkovich denies the charges. So do his family, employer, and the White House, who say he was wrongfully detained.
These espionage charges are ridiculous. The targeting of American citizens by Russian government is unacceptable. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms.
Gershkovich is the son of Soviet émigrés and grew up in New Jersey. He moved to Russia in 2017 to work there as a correspondent. The Wall Street Journal hired him in 2022. Gershkovich is the first American journalist to be jailed in Russia on espionage charges since the Soviet era. Despite strained relations, US and Russian officials have indicated that talks are ongoing about releasing Gershkovich in a prisoner swap.
Let him go.
But the US and Russia have not yet reached an agreement. In an interview in February of this year, Vladimir Putin indicated he wants to swap Gershkovich for a Russian hitman sentenced to life imprisonment in Germany for murdering a Chechen dissident in Berlin in 2019. Some experts say the trial could help bring the negotiations forward.
It's a very unfortunate situation all around, but this may be a glimmer of hope in his eventual coming home, because this trial will establish a verdict, and Russian justice needs to see a verdict in a case before I believe that they're willing to do some negotiation for whatever might be the outcome.
But by making the trial secret, Russia is hiding his case away from the public, while for Gershkovich, the uncertainty continues.
Well, I want to bring in now Paul Beckett. He's an assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal. He joins me from Washington, D.C. Mr. Beckett, it's good to have you with us. Evan has been held by Russia since March of last year. How much contact are you able to have with him, if at all? I mean, are you able to tell us how he's doing, how he's holding up?
Thank you. For the first 15 months until just this week, he was in a security services prison in Moscow, and we had lawyers who were able to see him once a week, and he was able to communicate with us and with his family by letter. So we know that he has held up incredibly well. We always knew he was a great reporter. We've been astonished by what a strong and admirable man he is. With his move to Yekaterinburg, where the hearing was today, we don't know what the protocols will be for being able to keep tabs on him. We're hopeful that we'll be able to maintain that, but he's just entered this period of uncertainty as the hearing continues.
The images that went out this week, this photo of Gershkovich standing in a glass box inside a Russian courtroom, what is your paper able to do to help a colleague that you say is being held on baseless charges?
Well, we're trying everything we can to make sure that we can make life better for him in any way that we can, be it from correspondence communication to getting him in provisions that might make life a bit better where he is. The thing that's aggravating for us is it's not really a trial. It is a hearing at which the false accusations that have been made against him will be endorsed by a judge, and then he'll be convicted. So, you know, where this leads is to a sentence of up to 20 years in Russian prison or a work camp or wherever.
How confident are you that the U.S. government is doing everything in its power to ensure Evan's release?
So the government's been responsive to our concerns over the last 15 months, and as you mentioned earlier, there have been a couple of attempts at negotiation that would bring Evan home. And we understand that those are ongoing. So we know there's activity. We just don't know if there's progress. And this is a vital time for that. Once you get to September and the US presidential campaign is in its final stages, it just becomes more uncertain, more volatile. So this is the window where the US government has to act. And we would really like to see them do that in the next few weeks.
We had an analyst in the report that aired just before you and I began speaking, and he said that probably what has to happen is this trial has to run its course. There has to be a verdict. He'll be found guilty. And then the Kremlin will feel more comfortable about talking about a possible prisoner exchange. Is that your read on this situation as well?
That's an interesting one, because about a year ago, the Russians said that they wouldn't entertain any negotiations around a swap or any other way to bring him home until after a trial. That said, we know that there have been conversations periodically through this whole time. So, we don't believe it takes a verdict to get him back, but the Russians did say that at some point. It was notable to us that President Putin has never actually said that himself. So whatever the Russians are feeling about the need for a verdict, or, we just need those negotiations to happen. If they don't happen, then Evan stays on this preordained path to Russian prison.
And there have been reports that put Evan's name together with Paul Whelan, who is an American who is also being held in Russia. He's been there for several years now, that they would possibly be presented together in this prisoner exchange. Does that give us any indication on how the Kremlin values an American life at this point in time?
Well, we've seen Paul Whelan be part of negotiations, but not come home a couple of times, with Trevor Reed, as a former Marine, U.S. Marine who was in Russia, and then, of course, with Brittany Griner, the basketball player who came home in a swap. So Paul Whelan's sort of been part of the picture now for two other people who have left, and we would be very hopeful that any deal that involved Evan also involved Paul, and also involved other Americans there. Of course, Evan's not the first. He was the first since the Cold War journalist to be detained, but since then, Alsu Kurmasheva of Radio Free Europe has been there for a year now. And, we would like to see all U.S. citizens who are detained in Russia released.
I know in my work, I've met many Americans who have worked here in Berlin, who have gone on to work in Moscow, and then moved on to other cities. And that's the usual run of things. And with Evans, of course, we see that it's not always that way. DW News, for example, the organization where I work, it's been banned from reporting from Russia. I mean, Russia is and can be a dangerous place for journalists. What would you say to journalists from foreign media outlets who are still working in Russia?
I think the risks of reporting from Russia have risen exponentially in the last couple of years. And that's really why Evan was taken. It's why Alsu is behind bars. So things have changed. I think there's been a steady deterioration, but that deterioration has accelerated a lot. So it's become a very dangerous place to practice journalism, because they've effectively made journalism, as you and I understand it, into a crime. So that's obviously a decision that each news organization makes for itself, but you did see in the wake of Evan's detainment that many American reporters and many American news outlets essentially withdrew, which you also feel is just exactly what the Kremlin probably wanted. So a lot of correspondents who were in Moscow are now covering Russia from Berlin, from Dubai, from Warsaw, from London, and they do so very gamely, but they would be the first to say that it's far from ideal and you need to be on the ground.
Paul Beckett, assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Beckett, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today, and we certainly wish Evan all the best. Thank you. Well, I'm joined now by our correspondent, Benjamin AlvarezGruber. He is following this story for us from Washington. Good to see you, Benjamin. That image of a U.S. journalist in a glass box in a Russian courtroom, it's a stark image. Have there been reactions in the United States?
It is indeed a stark image, and we had some reactions also from the State Department earlier today. They called the start of this trial, and I quote, a performance put on by Russian authorities to justify the repression of journalists and independent voices. Spokesperson Matthew Miller also said that staff from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow were granted brief access to the courtroom before the proceedings began. However, they were not permitted to speak. To him, Washington is accusing Moscow of using individuals like Gershkovich and also fellow detained U.S. citizen Paul Whelan as a bargaining chip, and his employer posted also a link with resources saying that they will keep telling his story until he can tell his own.
Russia and the United States say that they are negotiating a possible prisoner exchange here. Is that where this is all headed?
We know from both Washington and Moscow that talks around a possible prisoner exchange are underway. And let's remember that this case in calling for his release has strong bipartisan support, not just from the Democrats, but also from the Republicans. His parents were at the State of the Union address earlier this year, also with a strong support by Republican Speaker of the House. What we know about this is not a lot about these negotiations that are ongoing. John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, did not detail this diplomacy with Russia. That's very normal also for these cases, but said that the administration will continue to do everything it can to bring them home. And he also once again reiterated that Evan has never been employed by the U.S. government, that he is not a spy, saying that he should never have been detained in the first place. That the White House is trying to strike a prisoner exchange here is also not a new development, because almost a year ago, in July of 2023, President Biden was asked about the case of this detained Wall Street Journal journalist, and he did not only stress that the process to get him released was underway, but also said that he was serious about a prisoner exchange. Now, of course, it remains to be seen if and how this will happen.
Our correspondent, Benjamin AlvarezGruber, with the latest tonight from Washington. Benjamin, thank you.